Good afternoon, everyone. This is Queenie Clem with Queenie's Book Talk and Reviews, and I am your literary ambassador. And today I have a special guest on my channel. Please introduce yourself to the readers, please.
Hello, my name is Terah Shelton Harris, and I am the author of One Summer in Savannah.
Okay, can you share a moment or an experience that initially inspired you to become a writer?
Oh, wow. Well, I think I would probably have to pinpoint that to the sixth grade. I am old enough to, and I don't know how old your readers are, or your listeners are, but there was in school, there was a little program in school called DEAR, which was drop everything and read. Do you remember that?
Mm-hmm.
And my sixth grade teacher, her name was Julie Cook, she allowed us to read or we could write. So she kind of took that to a different level. And there would be times when I would read, but there was also times when I would write. And so I would use that time to write. And she saw me writing. And at the time, I had just had this crazy idea for this story about my sixth grade class. And I remember writing that. And she asked me, she was like, "Do you like writing?" And I realized it was just so therapeutic for me to write. And she says, "Well, maybe when you finish the story, maybe you can read it, in front of the class." And I thought, no, I'd never read it. But then just one day she came to me and she said, "Are you done?" And I said, "Yeah." She said, "Don't you read it?" And I stood up and I read that story. And the class, their reactions, they laughed at the parts where they were supposed to be jokes, and they
Mm-hmm.
gasped at the parts that were supposed to gasp at. And it was seeing the reaction from people of something that I created that really cemented that, this is something that I really enjoy and something that I really want to do. And I think I caught the writing bug, then.
Okay. What are some of your earliest stories or books that influenced your passion for writing?
Ooh, I grew up, well, the Scholastic Book Fair would come around, and I know they're catching a lot of flack right now because they're not really as diverse as they should be. But even back then, they weren't. But I would read the Babysitting Club books by Anne Martin. Those were like the first books, and there was a series of them, and I wanted and I liked the series of books. So I remember reading those whenever I was, in around the same time when I kind of developed my love for reading, for writing, the Babysitting Club books. And I just remember reading about those, Claudia and Joe and Stacy. I fell in love with those books. So those are probably my earliest ones. As I got older, I started reading more books by authors that look like me, just because, we really didn't have a choice. We didn't really have a lot of books written by people that look like us. And so I used that opportunity to start reading a lot of books by Black authors. One of my favorite books of all time is Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurst, Invisible Man, all those, Black Boy. Those were the books as I got older. And when I was in college, I'm an English major, and I studied a lot of different types of literature. So I am a sponge for information. I'm a sponge for books. There's pretty much not anything that I read that did not influence me in some way.
Okay. Writing a novel is a significant undertaking. Can you describe your journey from the initial idea for this book to completing the manuscript?
Yeah, so One Summer in Savannah is the first book that I had published. It's not the first book that I wrote. And so I wrote a book. There's a book on my hard drive that I call the practice book that will never see the light of day. But because that book, and I'm not going to say it was a failure, I just was not unable to get an agent for it. I was unable to get it published. And so I said, if I was ever to write a book again, that it had to be the right story, the right idea, the right theme, everything. So I just kind of waited for a while. I took a couple years off, which I do not recommend anybody do. I probably should have just went and started writing the next book, but I wanted to wait for the right inspiration and the right theme and the right story to find its way to me. And I was patient. And the first piece of inspiration for One Summer in Savannah came after the South Carolina church shooting. When, just days after that event, those family members and the survivors of that church shooting walked into that courthouse and they forgave the shooter. And that's when I realized, oh, I don't know anything about forgiveness. Forgiveness was always something that was told to us to always keep forgiveness on the table as someone that grew up in the church. But no one ever told me that I could define forgiveness for myself. It's just like, what is forgiveness to me? And so I realized then that, I want to write a book that's going to challenge readers' definition of forgiveness the way my definition of forgiveness was challenged. And so I had a theme. I knew I wanted to write about forgiveness, but I didn't have a story until someone really close to me shared something with me that I never knew, that she had conceived a child from a sexual assault. And she said these words, and she says, and I practice the act of forgiveness every day. And I realized then that I had a story to tell that was attached to my theme that I wanted to write. And so I just kind of went to work. I had a story, I had a theme, and I wrote. One Summer in Savannah is my COVID novel. Is what a lot of writers wrote books, during COVID when everything was shut down. But I'm a librarian, so my library closed for 3 months, and so I was able to go home and really write, a lot of it, and really get locked into the idea, into the theme, into the story. And so, it was probably maybe a 1.5 year journey from the first little nugget of idea until when I finished.
Okay. Were there any key lessons or insights you gained while writing this book that you would like
Oh,
to share?
yeah, so many, several. How much time do we have? I learned a lot. I learned a lot about the laws of this country. I learned that there's no federal law that restricts the parental rights from a man who conceived a child from a sexual assault. And so I learned that it's left up to the states to decide for custody in these type of issues. And we have 50 different states, so we have 50 different laws for this. And I learned that a lot of states don't really even have, barely have laws on the books for custody when conception after sexual assault is involved. There's barely any laws on the books for some of these states. And it disappointed me. It made me upset. And it really brought awareness to that, sexual assault is a really hard and heavy topic, but conception after sexual assault is just an even darker side of sexual assault that I feel like we really don't talk about. We really don't discuss. And one of the things that I learned was that bringing that awareness to a topic that we don't talk about, makes it real in the eyes of people. And then I also learned what forgiveness was for me. I learned and talking to and doing the research for this book, I learned that forgiveness does not equal forget. Just because you choose to forgive someone for something doesn't mean that you forget what happened to you and what this person did to you. That it's okay that you can forgive them and not necessarily letting them off the hook for what they did to you. And so I learned that forgiveness is for the person giving it. It does not by any means absolve the other person of their wrongdoings. It's just meaning that you, the person that's giving it, is just choosing to just move on from it and not let it hold you hostage.
Amen. How do you approach character development? And are your characters inspired by people you know are entirely fictional?
Character development is weird for me because I don't see scenes when I write. And so I hear voices, and my husband says, "Stop telling people you hear voices." But I hear voices. My characters speak to me. They speak to
Mm-hmm.
me. So my character development comes from what they tell me about them. And I know that sounds strange, but any other writers would kind of understand, how the story kind of takes over you and becomes you. And so my characters kind of lead and guide me. But yes, they are a lot of times influenced by real people. Not so much in One Summer in Savannah. Sarah is a composite of my friend, of the person that whose story I'm sharing, but everyone else is just kind of made up. There may be more characteristics and personalities that some of my characters tend to embody of people that I know. More so for my second book, there are some almost direct composite people in my second book that are from people that I know in real life, but my characters just kind of guide me and tell me who they are and what they look like. One of the tough things that people have been asking me from this book is, who do you see playing Sarah and who do you see Jacob? And I'm like, I don't see anybody. I didn't see anybody when I was writing it except for the character of Jacob. He's the only one that revealed to me as far as a visual of what he looked like, not a description. And that's Jesse Williams from Grey's Anatomy. Oh, he is the perfect Jacob. But outside of that, I didn't see anybody else. I
Mm-hmm.
just have the character descriptions of what they told me they look like. So my writing process when it comes to character development is very strange.
Okay. Do you have a favorite character or scene in the book that you enjoy writing the most? If so, what made it special for you?
Oh, I love, and I can't, it's a spoiler. I love the end of the book. So for me, my writing process is kind of strange. Before I can start writing, I have to know how the book is going to end. And so once I know the book and how the book is going to end, I've written the end, and then I kind of go back and write to the end. And so, but the end was the end of One Summer Savannah is probably one of my favorite scenes to write for several reasons. One, I write all my books longhand. So I write everything physically out on a notepad, and then I go back and transcribe it. But this scene, I actually just typed it right in the computer, which I don't normally really do, but it just came to me. I saw it as clear as day, as far as the characters talking to me and the journey that they wanted to take. And I just typed it all. And the end of One Summer in Savannah is almost entirely the way I wrote it. There's only a few things that we cut or enhanced, but for the most part, it was just completely how I saw it or how it came to me in a vision of how to write it. So that was kind of weird. And that's why I think it's one of my favorites, because I don't normally write like that, but it just all came together. And I remember finishing and thinking, how am I going to get the characters to this point? Because it's the end, and then the beginning is something else. And so it was a challenge for me, but it's definitely one of my favorite scenes.
Okay. What role do beta readers and editors play in your writing journey, and how do you handle the feedback and revisions?
I don't work with beta readers. I learned that in my first book. Too many opinions can alter my opinion of my own story and my own book. I don't know. I learned that. I had a lot of people with my practice book read it and tell me what they thought. And it was just kind of these varying different opinions on what's working, what's not working, so much that I think I lost sight of the story myself, trying to appease other people and trying to answer those questions. And so I said to myself, I'm not working with beta readers anymore. So I don't work with beta readers. I have a writing partner who is my agent sibling, who I send my work to. And he's a published author. So he helps me. He'll say, this thing needs to be bigger, or you can make this thing smaller, or you can do more here. So that's the extent of a beta reader that I use. I do hire my own freelance editor. Her name is Kristen, and she's great. I pay her to help me with the developmental parts of the book and making sure it's coming together. But that's something that I choose to do. It's not something that I feel like all writers need to do, but it's just something that I chose to do, since I don't work with beta readers, but someone that has professional, experience on making books better versus beta readers who, not saying that they don't have that experience, but just someone who just can look at a book and see what needs to be fixed or edited or changed.
Okay. As a writer, how do you balance the creative process with the practical aspects of publishing and promoting your work?
The writing process. Well, I'm still employed full time at the library. So, like I said, one of the things that I think helps me get my writing time in is I write all my books longhand. And so I can write anywhere. I keep a notebook in my car. I write at my desk if the characters are whispering something to me. I'm able to write at a stoplight, just because I don't always have to have a computer next to me in order to type it. As a matter of fact, I have my notebook right here, and I will show you. This is you can see that, how that's written. And so this is my notebook. This is the notebook that I'm using for my third book that I'm currently writing now. Each one of my books have its own separate notebook. And so I'll just write in that. And that kind of helps me stay ahead of when I'm supposed to be writing, but just because, as I said, I'm still working full time. So that's how I'm able to get my word count in.
Okay. What do you find most fulfilling or rewarding about being an author, and what keeps you motivated to continue creating stories?
The reactions from readers. I have been on tour for One Summer in Savannah. It came out in July 4th, and I have been on tour pretty much all summer. And even prior to that, I had a lot of pre-publication events, and just talking to people who come to those events and tell me how much they really enjoyed the book, how much they loved it. And not only that, but like tell me like detailed scenes, like of things that they liked, and to let me know how much they really liked it and how much they really just like got invested into this story. And I promise you that never gets old when someone can tell you that they cried after, after finishing the book, or they was upset, at something that happened in the book. So yeah, that's the most rewarding part, is just talking to readers out there and just knowing that this book had a connection, to them and for them.
What format of publishing do you do, and why did you pick that format?
Do you mean like traditional versus
Mhm.
self-publishing? Traditional publishing is my chosen format. I be I no offense to anyone that chooses self-publish. It's just a lot of work that goes into self-publishing. And I knew from the beginning that I was not willing to put in that kind of time and work that goes into self-publishing, just because, as I said, I work full-time. I just dreamed of traditionally publishing a book. And basically, even though there's still a lot of work when you traditionally publish a book that goes into, it coming out, I just did not want to have to beat everything, as sometimes it seems you are when you self-published or you are hybrid publishing, is you pick the cover and you pick all that. I just chose traditionally publishing just because that's always just been my dream.
Okay. Now tell us about the setting of the book.
Okay. So the setting of the book is in Savannah, Georgia. And it's very strange because people ask me, how did you set the book in Savannah, Georgia? I live in Alabama. Well, it's because of where Jacob lives. And so Jacob lives in this island, Heard Island, which is 40 miles south of Savannah. And it's so strange because I'm not even sure how I discovered this island. I cannot go back to say, oh, I discovered this island this way. I don't even know. I just remember reading about this island and that it's only accessible by boat or airplane. And I thought, how cool is that? But
Yes.
then how symbolic it is for Jacob's journey that Jacob has returned home after this incident, and he's ready to kind of put his family back together to understand this event that kind of altered his whole family, but he still had his boundaries. And what other great example of boundaries than, you can only come see me if you have to get on a boat or an airplane. And so I thought, how great is that's very symbolic for his character. I like to tell people that everything in One Summer in Savannah is intentional. Like everything is done, everything I did was on purpose. And that's including where he lived, but also where Sarah lived. Sarah, in the beginning part of this book, lived in Lubec, Maine, which is the easternmost town in the continental United States, which it is as far east as you can go in the United States. And it's very symbolic for how far Sarah was willing to go to get away from what happened. Like she was willing to go, and she wanted to go to the ends of the world in order to get away from what happened. And so I wanted their setting is so important in books to me. And so I wanted that to be intentional and just not just set them someplace for the sake of doing it, but that was very symbolic to their characters as well.
Okay. Now, Sarah and Jacob are complex characters with rich emotional journeys. How did you develop and flesh out these characters throughout your writing process?
Well, Sarah was, I shouldn't say an easy character, because Sarah is a composite of my friend whose story I'm telling. So Sarah was an easier character for me to write because I had a real life person that I can kind of use examples from and base it on. Jacob is completely fabricated. It's completely made up. And so he was difficult. And it's funny because when I was writing this book, it was only supposed to be a single Sarah POV. It's always been Sarah's story to tell. And that's what I thought I was going to write, just a one single POV from Sarah's standpoint. But as I mentioned earlier, my characters speak to me. And the character of Jacob would whisper and say these things. And I just thought, I can use none of this stuff that this character is telling me. And then when I was writing, I kind of hit a wall writing Sarah's story. And I just felt like something was missing. And that's when I realized that I need to utilize this character of Jacob. And so I made Jacob have a POV. So, One Summer in Savannah is now a dual POV, and it alternates between Sarah's point of view and Jacob's point of view. But it didn't start off that way. And I realized that what I was missing in Sarah's POV was Jacob's POV. He offered such a unique perspective to Sarah's story. Because we have a Jacob POV, we're able to hear directly from Daniel. We're able to hear directly from Birdie, which if it was in just a single Sarah POV, we would have never got that. And so that's when I realized, like, Jacob could help her with the closure that she needed to help her reach that place of forgiveness by showing the other side of her story and telling her things that maybe the readers would have never been able to see for themselves. And so it's really funny how Jacob's character just kind of fleshed himself out and like it just made himself have a whole role and take up half this book because how important he was to Sarah's story.
Hmm. The book explores the concept of forgiveness. Can you share your thoughts on this theme and significance in the story?
Yeah, forgiveness, as I mentioned earlier, is the theme, and it was really important that we really showed how Sarah reached that place of forgiveness. And it's not something that you just say, "Okay, I forgive you." For those, and we're not doing spoilers, but I just didn't. I wanted the reader, as you read One Summer in Savannah, you see Sarah is starting to give in a little bit more and more and more and more, and they're always her decision, her choices that she made. You see her starting to slowly tear down, these walls that she had put up for herself. And so that way it's realistic to get to the end and see how she got there. And so I really wanted to show that in the journey of forgiveness. Forgiveness is not something that is easy, and I didn't want this to be an easy decision for Sarah to make. I wanted her, and I want the reader to see that she struggled with it, but she also slowly how she got to the point of the end, and just to show people that the road to forgiveness is not easy. It is not easy. It's hard and it's rough, but it's worth it as well.
Okay. How did astrophysics and poetry play a significant role in the characters' lives? And how did you incorporate these elements into the narrative? And what does this represent to you?
That's good. Astrophysics is, which today is the partial eclipse, which is kind of awkward because Jacob would have loved, to see a real partial eclipse. But astrophysics played a deep role into this because of its place and how important time is in astrophysics. Looking into the sky is like looking back in time. The sun is 8 minutes away. The rays that finally reaches us is 8 minutes old, and it shows how important time was, like an undercurrent theme of this book, that 8 years have gone by. And yet it's still something that's affecting the character. So that's the portion that astrophysics had. And so was Alana's love for time and her love for watches, was also just keeping that undercurrent of that hidden theme of time, going. Poetry comes into it because Hosea, who is Sarah's father, speaks completely in poetry. And that's just because my grandfather suffered a stroke whenever I was 12 years old, and he lost his ability to speak. And so for the rest of his life, we had to decipher his meanings and the different things that he was trying to tell us. And so I thought I'd love to honor my grandfather some way. And why not make him, something about him very symbolic to Sarah's journey and Sarah's story. But I said, oh, I need Sarah's father to speak words. Like I can't have him not say anything. And so I thought about, why not use poetry? When you read a poem, you have to do what? And when you finish it, you have to decipher the meaning. Like sometimes you have to think about what that poem is trying to tell you, what you're trying to get from that poem. And so that's why I use poetry just as a way of deciphering, what he was trying to say, in terms of honoring like a characteristic from my grandfather.
Okay. Now, the book deals with sensitive topics like sexual assault and trauma. How do you approach handling these themes when writing, and what messages do you hope the readers to take away from it?
Yeah. So, yes. So before I started writing, I just remember thinking, whoa, what am I doing? Conception after sexual assault is rarely covered in fiction. And I thought, oh, how am I going to approach this topic without it being so heavy to people? And it still is a heavy book, but I wanted to focus on what's important. And so I made a list of like, what do I want the reader to really take away from this book? And I wanted the reader to understand that conception after sexual assault, it happens to hundreds of thousands of women every year. Like I wanted people to understand that. I wanted people to understand that there's not a lot of laws on the books that protects or helps these women. And so Sarah there's a scene that Sarah kind of is worried about, losing custody of Alana. And that's a very real, characteristic that a lot of these women face. But instead of ramping that up and making it just all negative, I wanted to make it about Sarah's love for her daughter, and that how she wanted to do the right thing by her daughter. And it was really all about her love. And that was easier for me to focus on that based on, my friend's story. And that's exactly what she chose to do, was to think about her daughter versus all the negative things that comes across, with this particular topic. And I want readers to understand that forgiveness is for them. You don't have to listen to what other people say. Whenever I was telling people that I was writing a book about a woman who conceived a child after a sexual assault and have to decide whether or not to allow her attacker's family into her daughter's life, people was like, no. Like, they immediately, quickly said, no, that's an easy decision. But it's not an easy decision to make when you have an 8-year-old genius daughter who looks like her father, asking questions every day about her father and his family and who she is and where she comes from. It's easier for us on the outside to say what we would do, but we're not in Sarah's shoes. And so I want people to just, define forgiveness for themselves and what they're willing to forgive, and to just also bring awareness to conception after sexual assault. And that, there, like I said, there are hundreds of thousands of these women, across this world that, are faced with this every day.
Okay. What events do you have coming up for the remainder of the year?
I am in Indiana next week for the Carmel Public Library Foundation luncheon. And then I will be at the Louisiana Book Festival. I think it's Louisiana Book Festival that's in Baton Rouge. And those are like my last 2 major events that I have after a summer of being just about everywhere throughout the Midwest and the East Coast.
Yes. What are you currently working on right now?
I am working on my 3rd book, because publishing is weird. Publishing is very weird. I'm working on my 3rd book. But my 2nd book, Long After We Are Gone, comes out of May of 2024. May of 2024. So we are already finished, already turned in another book. So we are writing a 3rd book. Yeah.
Okay. So 2024.
In May of 2024.
Oh, goodness. So how can readers find you and your books?
Okay. They can go to my website, terahsharris.com. I'm also active. I'm more active on Instagram than any social media. I still have a Facebook page, but I'm rarely on it. And I still have an X, or formerly known as Twitter page, but it's mostly just for updates. So I'm more active on Instagram, which is Terah S. Harris is my handle.
Okay. Can you read an excerpt from your book?
Yes. I will read probably one of my favorite passages of the book, and it's the very beginning part of the book. It's difficult to pinpoint the moment I started loving my daughter. I wish it was when she fluttered inside me for the first time, or when I cradled her tiny bodies seconds after birth. The truth is, my love for her started much later, when the reality of her conception had faded enough for me to see only her, when I realized that she, like me, was a survivor. Probably, though, there was no one moment, but an aggregation of moments, many of them happening because of her vulnerability. When she suffered through her first bout with colic, during her fussiness over cutting 3 teeth simultaneously. Moments when a maternal mixture of emotions and hormones hummed through me, signaling that it was normal for me to love her, and reminding me over and over again that having her was well worth the emotional cost. I study her now, playing down by the water. Her long hair catches in the breeze, whipping sandy strands across her golden face, her unafraid green eyes watching, waiting for the next wave. These features, his features, are all I remember about her father. And yet, what I don't know about him, I see in her, like a window into a stranger's soul. Her drawings always resemble, a bit too perfectly, her intended goal: a dog, a tree, a house. Her proficiency for mathematics and algebra and trigonometry and calculus. Talent you're born with, not taught. I'd often wonder if she didn't eat fish because he didn't, or if she loves to swim because he did. One thing is for sure, she is all him and none of me, and that single thought terrifies me.
Any final thoughts before we close?
No, thank you so much for having me. I just want to say, for anyone who has read One Summer in Savannah, thank you so much for picking up a copy of it, whether it's at your independent bookstore or your library. I thank you so much for reading it and loving it. And to stay tuned for my next book, Long After We're Gone, that comes out of May of 2024.
All right. Well, thank you for coming in today. I really appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.
All right. This is Queenie Clem with Queenie's Book Talk and Reviews. Happy reading. Bye, y'all.